Hi there, and welcome to my Bible review. We're back doing our reviews. We had a break over the Christmas period for those of you who watch in real time. For those of you who don't, welcome to the next review in the series. Basically, what we do is we take literally the Bibles off my bookshelf because it turns out I love Bibles so much. I have so many different Bibles, translations, versions of the same thing, sometimes study books, etc. And so we give a review of the translation. We also look then, after talking about the translation for a while, we look at different versions that I have and that have been produced. And so this gives you some idea of how you can use them, the range of Bibles that are available. I have sometimes only one version, sometimes many. We are going to be talking now about one of the biggest translations in the Bible history, which is the New International Version today. So I have quite a few of these, quite a few more than I realised and quite a few less than I realised. So that was quite good. So why did I want to do the New International Version? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit background to why. Because there was, when I was growing up as a little girl, this kind of dichotomy or war of the translations. And I think it still sort of exists today, although people are becoming more aware of how ridiculous it is to have a war of translations. But at the time, if you were a conservative Christian who believed in the Bible and who had good values and wanted to take the Bible very seriously, you read the King James Version. And if you were one of those fluffy Christians, then you read the New International Version. Of course, that led to a lot of people having arguments, no shocker there. But I think as a young person growing up, what I noticed about this kind of war that was happening around me in my Christian sphere was that people weren't really talking about things that seemed real to what was happening within the actual Bible translation itself. And it seemed kind of weird to me to pit a, 1611 translation against a 1978 translation. It just seemed like an odd thing to do. This was like hundreds of years apart. We don't pit Shakespeare against, great works of today. We don't pit them against each other. They can stand for what they stand for. And we don't, and when we're translating things into modern language or into other languages, we don't pit them against each other as if somehow it's nefarious and the good Christians, that are doing this work are doing it with evil intention and are trying to corrupt the biblical narrative. And that's not to say that you shouldn't be worried about translation. I just think that it seems weird that you would have so many people sitting in committees and rooms that would spend so much of their life translating the Bible. It doesn't particularly pay very well. It's not like you're in it for the money. You're in it because you love the translation. And I think that the NIV kind of KJV war, which still rages in some ways today, is one of those things which seems really just, it seems like they should be able to coexist and it not be a problem. So today we're looking at the New International Version, and it was, for me, it was the first time I would read a Bible that would speak to me in a language that I actually understood. And so for me, that was really important. So I want to give you a bit of background history to it. The translation intention itself. So what's the translation intenders? What do they intend? Who are they? How many people? We've got our usual questions that we have to ask. So let's ask those questions. What was the intention of the translation? Well, they wanted to capture the way that the original language would have spoken, but give that to modern readers. And so their understanding of the way that the original language wrote is that the people of the time understood it. It spoke to them with their own idioms, with their own language, and it would have been understandable to the people who were receiving it. It would have been handed down through generations, and they would have understood and would have used the language in ways that they understood. So it was in the Hebrew, it was in the Greek, it was in the Aramaic, and it would have been in language that they understood, and it would have spoken to them in their culture, in their place, and in their time. I think that's really important, because then what the New International seeks to do is to remove some of the barriers that we would have reading a Hebrew Bible. So if we had to just pick up the Hebrew Bible and start reading, unless you've studied the Hebrew language, you would find that really difficult, right? It starts in a different place, it runs a different direction, you don't know the alphabet that it works from, you would really struggle. I mean, you could try, but it would be a struggle. You would need to go to classes. And so they want to bring that world, or the idea that the reader of the Bible should be able to understand what's being said to them. And I think that's a great principle to have. They say that they pioneered this new approach. Now, if you've seen my Bible translation videos, everyone says they pioneer a new approach to translation. Is it? But in 1978, they wanted to have a different approach, and so they have this pioneering approach that they want to launch, which balances the clarity of language with the intention of the author, and so with the meaning. So that duality that they're trying to achieve. Now, many Bibles translations seek to do this, and so each one makes decisions on whether language is important or meaning is important, and at which point does meaning take over from language. These are interpretive issues. This, however, I was surprised to find out is a really rigorous process in the New International Version. I was actually a little bit surprised at how rigorous. So we're going to get to that in a little moment. But needless to say, how does a translation come into being? Oftentimes it's with one person's vision, one committee's idea. And in this case, there's a dude called Howard Long. He's an engineer from Seattle. He wants to share his faith with others, but people don't understand the King James Version, so he thinks to himself there must be a Bible that says what God says, but in a way that people actually understand. So he sets out on this quest. Finally, the Christian Reformed Church and the National Association of Evangelicals take him seriously and say, okay, this is a good vision. We're going to take this vision on and we're going to get together. And in 1965, there is a cross-denominational gathering in which they start from scratch. So instead of what some translations had done up till now, which was to just translate from the King James Version, maybe check it against the Hebrew and Greek, they wanted to just start from scratch. Get the Hebrew, the Greek and the Aramaic, start from scratch, translate it into English as they currently knew it, not bypassing, not going through King James English, which is a very different type of English. And so 80 scholars from a former board, and that committee is called the Committee on Bible Translation. That's the committee to this day that still works on the New International Translation. And this is how they do it. So for each and every book that they translate for the New International Version, there are 2 lead translators. There are 2 translation consultants. There's 1 English language consultant. And then once they have finished their process, there are 5 Bible scholars who review the work. And once that has finished, it then goes to a committee of 8 to 10 scholars who review and critique the whole thing, the whole process, everything that's been written, every footnote, everything, and send it back. And then once they've had their go, they can then send the samples of it to pastors, to testers basically. So pastors, students, lay people, just general Christians. And then they critique it, give their feedback and send it back. So it goes through a really rigorous test. I'm actually quite surprised at how rigorous the testing process is for this. And it's still used today, which I find quite amazing to see that there's that number of people. I was quite surprised actually, because you know, growing up, it was made as if the New International Version was the wishy-washy version of the Bible and they were nefarious and they had bad intentions and it wasn't a good translation. So to find out really that what you'd been told as a child is the complete opposite of what was actually happening, I've got to be honest, even in my old age, I'm feeling that that's quite a lot of information. So anyway, in 1968, the Biblica, it was known as something else back then, but they came on board with the translation, and then in 1978 we received the first full version of the New International Bible. What's quite astounding is that they continue to have this process what seems like every year. So they are continually reviewing and continually going back and checking the whole thing. And they're in the NIV, there are 5,200 manuscripts, original manuscripts that are being used. Which brings on this point of the war that happens in Christianity between the translations. And this was an interesting one. I think I wrote more notes, now I can't find them. But it's an interesting war, because what this war is saying is that in the New International Version, there are missing verses that the KJV has. And so look how this must mean it's terrible. Now, I'm going to challenge you to actually look up these so-called missing verses, because I think it's really I find it quite frustrating when people come to me. I'm a pastor, so when people come to me, I have to take these things seriously, of course. But in a way, I have quite a bit of a frustration. The New International Version has these verses missing, when in fact, the New International Version has all of the verses in them, and even more than the KJV, to be honest. And they have footnotes for the ones that are not included in the main translation. And the reason that some are not included in the main translation are this. In 1611, when you've got the translation that is KJV, there's only so much materials, manuscripts that are available. There are only so many scholars that you can be used. I mean, if you're listening to the volume of scholars that, of course, sit on this, you've got a committee of 80. Then you've got all these, the 66 books times 5 times 8 to 12. I mean, there's a lot of people that pour their heart and soul into these translations. There are hundreds of people that pour their heart and soul into these translations. And in addition to that, there are archaeologists across the globe who work in the North African, Middle Eastern region and are finding these manuscripts, have continued to find hundreds of manuscripts. And therefore, when you're looking at a translation that's used now versus a translation that was used then, now we have so many more manuscripts than we used to. And the reason that some verses aren't in is because they're not in all of the manuscripts. And the reason they're not in all of the manuscripts is because they could have been added later. They could have been added by an editor, not by the original author. And so there are all sorts of questions around those verses in particular, which means that they're there, but they're put into footnotes with the explanation. Now, for most of us who can read, you can see that quite easily. But yet still we have people who say that the King James Version is the only version of the Bible. Those people often never be able to read Hebrew and Greek, which is rather frustrating because that would be the only version of the Bible if you really wanted to be technical about it. And then they put down another translation because they say that they have these missing verses, when in fact, that's not necessarily true. So they might not be in the main body of the text, but they are in the footnote and very much present and alive and in the text and being used. So what do I think in terms of usability? For me, growing up, there were 3 Bibles that I knew. There was the King James Version, which is the one that was in my household, that as far as I could tell, every Christian household had. There was the one that we went to like the churches that dealt with kids and had more families and local, were working in poor areas, etc. And they had the Good News Bible. And then there was the NIV, and there was a lot of noise around who used an NIV, why they used the NIV. There were colour issues surrounding the NIV. I'm going to be honest with you that people from certain communities thought it was a white thing. Like, we don't use that. Look at those fluffy Christians over there. We don't do that. They're not real Christians anyway. And so there was a lot of battling over that. But in my experience of using the NIV, and I've used the NIV for years, one of the things that I've appreciated, particularly in recent years, is seeing scholars use the NIV in public. Because I think, the NIV is a beloved translation. You either, as I said, from when I was growing up, you either loved it or you hated it. But I think it's come a long way in the conversation, not in the translation itself, but actually in the conversation and dialogue around the translation. And I think that's important to note. It's not necessarily about the translation. It's about the conversation around something. And the conversation around the NIV has really transformed. And I have in front of me 7 editions of it, plus I have Bible journaling editions of it. I do quite love it. In terms of usability, what I like is the fact that it's accessible, that it's still academically rigorous, that you can still have a theological discussion based on based on the words that are written, which is really helpful. There's a consistency to it, and that it's updated. So I don't necessarily notice the updates as much anymore. Probably because I use a wide range of Bibles, so I must admit I don't know that I noticed if there's a difference between the Bible I had as an NIV when I was a teenager and the one that I have now. Couldn't tell you. But what I can tell you is that I think that it's definitely accessible. There's definitely an intention for people to understand and to be able to use that in their daily lives. And I think that that's really important. I think it's really important that you have that. So for me, I like the NIV. I've used it kind of consistently throughout my life. There's not been a time when I'm like, I'm never going to touch the NIV. I've heard the arguments for and against, but I personally think it's a great translation to use, especially if you're trying to do what the original person who really pushed for this wanted, which is to have a Bible that the average person who's never read a Bible, doesn't know a Bible story, has never heard of Jesus, or maybe heard of Jesus because of Christmas, but really doesn't know about Barnabas and Saul and, all of these great places and people, etc. It's great for that. It's great for bringing it into their world and making it accessible to them. And so we're going to look at a few versions of it that I have here. And I think it gives you an insight into the rigorousness of the NIV alongside its kind of accessibility conversation. So I'm just going to share a few with you, and then if you want me to look at any of these in particular detail, then please drop a comment and I will look at which ones you want to have a look at, because of course I use numerous Bibles and I'm going to gloss over them pretty quickly, but you may want to see them in more detail. Okay, so here we have it. We have a first of the Bible versions that I have. I'm starting with one of my most beloved versions. This is actually from Hodder and Stoughton. It is the British English version of the New International Version. It's obviously in purple, so you know that I really, really love it, but it was a gift from a friend. And it was one of the first Bibles which I found really easy to find Bible books in. You can see I've already, as many of you know, I'm a Bible journaling major as well. So I have my Bible journaling pen to hand. There are notes within it. You can see it's got its inscription there from a beloved friend. She gave it to me, and I had to be honest with you, I carried this Bible everywhere. You can see it's a little bit overly loved and worn, but it is so beautiful, and it's slimline, it's accessible. I mean, it just really did the job. It is in my most hated 2-column thing. If you've been watching this, you know how much I love a single column, but you don't get so this is where children have made me pictures and they stay in my Bible that I'm carrying at the time. But it was one of these Bibles that I really found very easy to actually find the scripture in. I didn't need to think too difficult. If I wanted to find a Bible book, I found it quite easy. The pages really turn quite easily and separate without, you see, I can separate an individual page. Sometimes Bible pages notoriously stick together and you have to fight to kind of separate them because they're so thin, but this one did quite well. There is shadowing, of course, so you have to be able to, which shadowing is where you can see the thing on the other side of the page, but to be expected. Thin page Bibles are like that. That's the nature of the Bible that we're using. So this is just a really nice slimline, everyday, put it in your handbag. As you can see, I've put it in mine quite a lot, Bible. And it's very simple, and it does what it says on the label, and I just loved it for what it was. So there are some, of course, notes here already, as you can tell. And so I'm just going to read from, I might as well read from the bits that I've got highlighted. Why not? Genesis chapter 1. And we're going to go with 26, and it says, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them." So this is the ease of the translation. It's fairly easy to understand, as I said, and this particular one I love. It now comes in multiple versions, but this is from the British arm of the New International Version. And of course, that's just to remind you that British English and American English are not the same, and so depending on which English you've learnt and which English is accessible to you will depend on which English Bible you should pick up. And this is one that I appreciate because British English, as I say, is not the same as American English, so it's helpful to me, but I have the others. So here we go. I have this one. This is in chronological order. 365 daily readings. I've got to say this one drives me insane because you're just supposed to read it as a book. I need to really start on day one and then just read it all the way through, because every time I try and pick it up and work out where the story is or what's happening, I get a little bit confused. But I think if you read it as it was intended to be read, it's a lot more straightforward. So if you want to read the Bible in the chronological order, there are Bibles like that have been rearranged. What I dislike is that I find it really difficult to figure out where we are at any given time. So that frustrates me somewhat. It does have the book and the numbers along the side to give you a full-on where you are and where you're going to. So it has that. It's just that I find it difficult to use. But it is in my favourite single column, which is why I picked it up. And one day I'm just going to read it from start to finish, because it's not the biggest book in the world, the Bible, contrary to popular belief. It actually isn't. There are bigger. But this is one that you could get which is quite accessible. And if you wanted to, say, read the Bible in a year and have an overview of the whole story, then this is a good one to go with. Here are two that I have, two very different ones. I have Interlinears, which are when you have the well, in this case the New Testament, but you have the original language with the English next to it. And so let me show you a page. This obviously, as you know, has been used and worked on quite a lot, because I had it at school when you're studying. In this case, what they do is the Greek is given precedence over the English for the students. So of course this is the Greek and then the English is on the side there. There are different ways of doing it. This one has it slightly differently. So it's the Greek here and the English here. So according to what you find easier to look at side by side, bearing in mind, of course, that the grammar rules are different. So if you don't know the Greek, this is actually still quite difficult to use. But if you do, this is a great teaching tool and a quick way in if you're having to check, oh, I'm reading this passage here, what's the Greek? And you can just look over on this side and have a look up at the word. So I think that's pretty cool. I do like and appreciate this, and when I'm in more study mode, which sadly as pastors we don't really have the time for, but when we're in study mode and able to study, these are invaluable tools. You know, I'd love to have more time to study so that everything that we bring can be even more detailed and even more in depth. But this is these were the interlinear ones. We have this one. I've since subsequently, I have a case for it, so let me just show you that. I have an actual case for it. I've taken the case off for the purposes of this, just to show you what it looks like and how big it is. This is the Cultural Background Study Bible, and this was created to obviously look at the original people and culture. This is what the logo looks like. I should put it that way, I guess. This is what the actual logo looks like when you have it on the cover. I've subsequently cut it off and use it as a bookmark on the inside, so it looks like this. And I've subsequently used them as book. I've cut up the entire cover. Here's another bit of it up here. This was in there as well. And if you go through, you will find other parts which are used as bookmarks. So there's a great tip for you. If you buy a hardback version of the Bible and it has a paperback cover on, and you want to have bookmarks, you can cover your put it in a case and then use the covers themselves as page holders or bookmarks for the actual pages, so that you know where you are. And if you're a student, this Bible I think was really intended for people who are really trying to study and dig in. Then it's great because you can have them in multiple places. So there we go. You've also got my study notes in from the year that I used this as my Bible of the year. So this was a couple of years ago now. This was a gift that was given to me. I absolutely love it. It's so great for putting the Bible in its context, for giving you additional information, for showing you how things looked. I mean, it's just a really great way of adding depth and dimension, because of course, while the New International Version intends to make it readable to me, the truth is the culture of those people, the culture of their time is very different. Alongside their language is very different from what I live now. And I you need to dig into that world in order to understand the weighting of certain stories, or how things are written, or why things exist. You know, there are a lot of laws, there are a lot of rules, there are a lot of social norms that just don't fit with how we live in, you know, Western countries. And there are some other countries that sort of say that it's the complete opposite for them. They would find this Bible almost useless because, of course, their culture is very similar. But I think everyone benefits from understanding the particular culture. You know, you can, let's say Great Britain, there's England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, all in this kind of close proximity of each other. But even within that, you've got London culture and outer greater London culture and Birmingham and Liverpool, and they're all slightly different. And so when you look at a Bible translation, and when you look at the Bible stories, to understand the people and their own culture and what they would have known coming into that story and receiving God's word, these kinds of Bibles are really powerful for that. So this was something that I really loved. I use it all the time. It helps, especially with quick study notes, if you're not able to, as I say, have lots and lots of many hours to spend in historical books. That's a great one. And then I have two here: the Serendipity Bible for groups, and the Quiet Time Bible, which is the New Testament and the Psalms. Both of these are like your devotional Bibles. This one has a study orientation, so it's there for people to plan Bible studies together and work together on, you know, it has questions down the side to help you if you're in a Bible study group. It has, you know, different ways of doing Bible studies, 200 Bible stories with questions. It's really great for, actually, if you've got a Bible study group you're running or leading, or you have a home group and you want a Bible that you can work out of. This is great for that. It has lots and lots of notes. I got it particularly for that reason. I got it because I wanted to have a home group again, to have a small group in which we just discuss and talk about different Bibles, different scriptures, and just push ourselves. This one, I think I picked this one up secondhand, and I picked it up because I'm the kind of person that really enjoys Bibles and just a bit of a Bible addict. I don't think I paid very much for it. But it was just nice because I thought, you know, I like quiet time too. I might be a loud, boisterous, loud kind of person who's, you know, professionally extroverted, but my introverted side said I could do with a devotional style Bible that had, like, you know, discovery, applying, responding, and just going through in a really quiet and calm way. And I just thought this would be quite a nice one for me personally, so I got this one. So that is the New International Version in all of its colourful glory and all of the differences that I have. I am quite sometimes surprised. I do have the Bible journaling version of this, and so we could do that sometimes, which will come. I'll do the Bible journaling after I've done just all the regular translations I have, so I've got a few more to do, and then we'll go on to the Bible journaling Bibles reviews. But these are really, the NIV has been really great for studying, for reading, for really getting into the scripture, for understanding, for deepening, you know, my respect for how people translate the original language. Obviously I've used it in my studies at university level, and so it's really given me that kind of way in. And I hope that if you're listening to this review, the thing that you take away from it is that, firstly, listening to people berate other Christians is probably not the thing that we should be doing. And if you're in a circle which really berates people from reading the New International Version, you probably want to think about, what does that mean as as a people? What does that mean as a human that I would take the time to do that? And then I think the other thing is, you know, there is no perfect translation. Everyone is trying their best. Everyone is doing their best. And so what any scholar will advocate to you is read a variety of versions so that you can get a closer understanding of the text, so that you can really push your own development and listen to God. And then finally, don't read singular verses and think that's the whole of the scripture. Read the stories, read the fullness of the story, read the entire story Find a way to understand the entire story. That may seem overwhelming, but you do it every day on TikTok, and you do it every day when you're listening to videos. You do it every day when you read a news article. You know, you'll read a blog and you'll read a whole entire page basically of biblical. You can do this. You can read a whole entire page. It seems overwhelming, but maybe find a Bible that's for you, that comes like this, that gives you an ease of how to read it without so much stress. And find a group that you can work with, who can sit in your home and learn how to read together and enjoy together and bring these stories across. So that's our review of the NIV. It's a staple translation, so I hope you've enjoyed the review. All the best. Bye.